Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 360 Event Center. Today, the topic is about the world refugee with the pandemic or COVID-19 situation. We have our distinguished guest and Mr. Kamrul Ahsan Khan from Canberra. I would like to request you to start the program for today. Thanks.
Studio, one from Canberra, the capital of Canberra. Mr. John is a professor of Australian National University, and he is also our leader. We have done a lot of activities for the refugee to pay attention by the government and international body. So he is a leader, in fact, and he is working for refugee for a long, long time. Welcome, John, and welcome, Mr. Sharif As Saber. He is a professor in economics in MIT in Melbourne. So I have two guests. So I'm sorry that we are a little bit delayed. The topics of the today is COVID-19 and also the refugee. What is it connected? Because a lot of people, and as an activist, as a common activist, I have an understanding the refugee situation issue has come from a long, long time due to the migration has been happening due to the climate change, due to environment disaster, war, and all this. So as I know that John is he's a professor and he's doing a lot of research. In fact, he's leading the refugee movement in Australia from Canberra. So I would request John to say something on this issue. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Kamrul. I think it's important to get a sense of historical perspective on this issue, that the refugee issue hasn't been one which has just been in existence for the last couple of years. In fact, I think we've seen, particularly since the Second World War, a major change in the movement of people across national boundaries for reasons of political persecution, racial persecution, or religious persecution. I mean, we have the huge transfers of people, for example, with the independence of the subcontinent of India from Pakistan and then later Bangladesh in both directions. We have refugees from Eastern Europe. We have enormous transfers of people. And the world, I think, following the Second World War, adopted a way of dealing with that movement of people who weren't moving simply for a better life, but were moving because they were really forced to move in a civilized way initially. We had, in 1951, the countries of the world, many countries got together and adopted a convention on refugees which said that it didn't really matter what documentation you had, you could apply for refugee status. It didn't matter whether you crossed a muddy land border in the middle of the night, or by boat, or by train, or by aeroplane, you could still apply for refugee status. And that was an important consideration for most of the post-war period, I think. That started to change not very long ago, between 20 and 25 years ago, when borders started to become more fortified again, and refugees started to be seen in a way that could be exploited politically. That politicians in many countries could say that the problem that's facing us, the problem that is threatening us, is not economic tough times, or it's not climate change, or it's not many other things. It's refugees trying to get in to take the things that you deserve. And I think politically what we've seen it in Europe with the rise of far-right politics, Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and many others. We've seen it also with Trump in the United States in relation to those fleeing from Central America in particular. And we've seen it in Australia, unfortunately, for a very long period of time. So politics has changed in relation to the refugee issue. It's become much more harsh. It's become much less humanitarian, much less tolerant, and it's associated with other changes in society. And I have to say, in the case of Australia, a large part of the way in which politicians have tried to mobilise opposition to refugees has been Islamophobia. It's been a fear of Muslims entering the country. And that combination of politics is very dangerous and is something which really has to be dealt with. And that's what I do. That's what I do. I try to deal with it. I try to, and many other people in this country, the country that I live in Australia, but around the world, are trying to take those issues on and to present the refugee in a different way, not as a threat, but as a person who should be welcomed, a person who should be protected, a person who should not be feared.
That's true. But still, the government machinery is not listening to your appeal. I know the biggest mobilization that has been organized by your organization, Refugee, in Canberra, I found as a big mobilization. I haven't seen such a big mobilization in Canberra. Always, Refugee Action Committee organize a different type of common people who is not participating in different political issues, but they are very much with the refugee movement. So it is a great achievement. But still, they are not listening. I mean, the government is not listening properly. It has some influence, no doubt about it, but still not up to the mark. And also, this is my idea that since that we have a serious issue due to the epidemics, and the Prime Minister said there will be a recession, big recession, like a second World War. So if the recession is happening, so there will be an issue, refugee issue. So then the government will be more reluctant to accept the refugee, and there will be more influx of refugee from other countries. Like in Bangladesh, we have a refugee from Burma, millions, and that might come up with more. From India might, or from Bangladesh, there might be some refugee to India. Whatsoever, you know. So what will be the situation? So my concern is, or our concern is that gradually there will be a serious threat of refugee, and there will be a war, because there will be a famine bring the war, famine invite the war. So there will be some situation. So in that context, what do you think? I will come to the Sharif Saber after you respond to this situation in this question, please.
Sure. Well, I think the refugee is a symptom of the failure of the international system. The refugee is a symptom of what's sometimes been called an arc of instability across a variety of countries in the world, which are destabilized or have been destabilized by war. In some cases, by Western intervention. In some cases, you look at the situation in the Middle East, for example, would you be seeing a Syrian refugee crisis if Iraq had not been destabilized by the war of 2003 and which followed? These are situations which are world problems. They're not the fault of those people who are suffering and are forced to flee. Now, we had this situation in the past. In the Second World War, millions of Jews in Europe, subject to Nazi persecution, attempted to flee and were not accepted by other countries. The famous case, the MV St. Louis, a German ship carrying about 600, bit over 600 refugees, tried to flee Germany. They went to Cuba. They had visas for Cuba in 1933, and they were rejected by Cuba. They attempted to get admittance to the United States. They were rejected by the United States. They were rejected by Canada. Some were taken by the UK, but most had to go back to Europe. And we now know that about half of those perished in the Holocaust. The civilized world cannot have that happen again. We cannot be sending people back to places where they're likely to be persecuted. Certainly, we can attempt to reduce the number of refugees that come in the first place, but that would require a different approach to international relations to the one that's very often currently pursued. So, for example, Trump in the United States is simultaneously deporting people back to Central America, to very dangerous places in El Salvador and Honduras, for example, and at the same time cutting aid to those places which might alleviate the situation which creates the refugees. We need a different kind of political approach to this, both to reduce the number of refugees who are forced to flee because they don't want to flee. People don't easily leave their home, their communities, their families, their religion, perhaps, their culture. They don't easily do that most often. And we need, at the same time, for those who are forced to flee, for developed countries, wealthy countries like Australia, like the United States, like most of the European countries, we need a more generous approach to take them, to settle them, to make their lives possible into the future.
To Professor Sharif Saber. He's working from different area. I would like to tell this situation what is going to happen because as you know that population migration is happening from long time and the world order is changing due to the migration. World order it has been changing for a long time, and since this COVID-19 shaped the whole world, and everybody, every country, even in the rich country, they are very anxious about the recession and economic disaster. So so what new world order can come after this sort of situation? We are expecting, and I am sure that if things go like this, there will be a lot of population migration from here to there. It's Burma to Bangladesh, Bangladesh to India, or India to Bangladesh, whatever. It will happen, and it happens. As John said, after the Iraq war, there is a lot of population, in fact, migration to the different countries. Even in the Europe, Europe is totally flooded with refugees. Now they have issues. Even the German, I know I had been to German that time, and German people are now very fed up. They are very anxious about their economy after having millions of population migrate people. So, would you please say something, Saif Sabir, on this issue, please?
Well, thank you so much. I think Professor John means what he mentioned about the history of migration around the world. And to a certain extent, it started in a mass scale after the October Revolution, that is Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, when there was a mass exodus of people actually took place from Russia. And then we know about the Spanish Civil War. Then we talk about even the revolution in China. 2 million people actually fled the country. And then, of course, John mentioned about the post Second World War situation and where we are at the moment. Now, look, although the refugee situation, what we are actually seeing today is a bad one, I would say it is the culmination of a situation that started a long time ago. That is, if you talk about Second World War and so on. And however, the various hotspots of problems around the world where people were kind of forcibly removed from their, homes, or they actually left the country in fear of their lives. So, and this has been happening for quite some time. But in recent years, I think over the last 50 years, or less than 50 years, I would say, this is becoming worse every day. Now, if you just see the total number of people that were forcibly displaced in 2019, we are talking about nearly 80 million people displaced. That is more than 1% of the global population, which is a huge number we are referring to here. Now, in terms of, as per the definition of refugees, of course, by UNHCR, we are talking about 26 million refugees at the moment, not settled but spread around the world. Now, most interestingly, and which is a real concern, is that 85% of these refugees are hosted by developing countries. And if you just look at the 5 top countries where they actually fled from, these refugees, that includes, of course, Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. And when you actually look at the host countries, only if you think about the top 10 countries hosting those refugees, among those top 10 countries, 9 of them actually are developing countries. Only one country, Germany, is the one who is a developed industrialized country. So the huge burden is there on developing countries to maintain those refugees. Now, there are a number of issues especially are very important for us here to look at during this COVID-19 situation. Number one, these people, what is the current situation of these refugees? So UNHCR in its recent reports clearly mentioned that they are very, very vulnerable at the moment. They are more vulnerable than the poor people in those developing countries, in those poor countries. And not getting enough support. They are not getting enough food. They're not actually getting enough water. They're not getting medicine. And it is also mentioned by UNHCR that across 131 countries, right, who are actually hosting those refugees, 130 countries. And those refugee hosting countries are experiencing, social or community kind of spread of COVID-19. So it is spreading through community infection. Now, which is very, very worrying. And another thing that refugee, that is UNHCR, is now saying that in many countries they were actually locked down without any reason. They are locked down. They can't actually go anywhere. And within that lockdown situation, they are having a lot of problems. The medicine is not there. The outside world actually doesn't know what exactly is happening in those camps. And in many of those camps, UNHCR doesn't even have access. So it is very problematic, the situation at the moment. Now, in terms of economy, Mr. Kamrul has clearly mentioned one thing, that economy is suffering around the world, and donation for refugees is very, the level or the flow is very low at the moment. And at the same time, resettlement target of 70,000, which was set for 2020, they are now saying that they probably will not even reach 50% of that resettlement target, which is very low anyway compared to, say, 26 million. They are only going to resettle 20,000 people in 2020, 70,000 people in 2020, but they're not actually reaching that target because they already have a shortfall of 36% from the last year. So overall, if you just look at the scenario, it is not that promising. And once COVID ends, hopefully sooner, if it does, once COVID actually ends, then the real issue would be that how to actually manage the situation, how to actually look at the situation, how to actually prop up the resettlement process or doing something for them. And I think it will be difficult because there will be less money, for every country to donate. Number one. Number two is, I think countries will be reluctant to take them because their own population they need to look after. So, and this kind of pleas will be there. So, what I would say, the situation after COVID 19, the refugees will be in a much worse situation than they are today. So, yes, I better stop here and then we can talk more about that later on.
Thank you very much, Sharif Saber. You raised some issues about particularly about the third world country, which is very worrying. The maximum the influx of the refugee the third world country, about 80% of the total influx. So like Bangladesh, I don't know about the 10 countries. What are those? But there must be Bangladesh is one of them, that they have a huge refugee, and they are totally overburdened with this population. Bangladesh is overpopulated, 160 million, and now we have a refugee from BAPA, from Myanmar. So this is really a very worrying situation. What is going to happen? Even in Bangladesh situation, there were some mobilization of the Myanmar soldiers. These are happening once upon a time, and it might happen anytime. So this is worrying us, and as we have some work in the hand, John organized a lot of programs. We attend the programs. But what is going to happen? And I see the dark side. What will happen? How we are going to face this situation, and this huge situation, and also the threat of war. As I know, I have gone through some articles. Uh, the refugee, and when there is a war, there will be a climate change. Climate change has not. It is also already ongoing problem, and that is happening every day. It is increasing, and when these things will happen, numbers of refugees will increase. Like there was a focus that Bangladesh will be large land will be affected. There won't be any much land to cultivate, to live. So this situation comes, so people will be desperate to move here to there. So this sort of situation are coming. So how to handle those things? If you, Sharif Saber has mentioned a few issues. John, if you can say a few things, how we are going to handle this situation from our perspective as activists or as we supporting refugee to settle every country. Please, John.
Look, thanks, Kamrul and Sharif. I think it's fundamentally a question of politics. The refugee issue is fundamentally a question of politics. The movement of people across national boundaries has been happening for a very, very long time. Um, and, really the greatest movements of people that took place in world history were in the 19th century in a per capita sense, with particularly people moving out of Europe, but also people moving out of the subcontinent of India and of China and so on. Proportionally, the flows of people for permanent settlement have actually declined since then. It's not so much a question of economics, it seems to me. It's a question of politics. It's about how political parties can attempt to use a fear of the outsider and a fear of immigration, and in particular, a fear of immigration which is less regulated, perhaps, such as refugee flows, in order to make political capital. It's how we deal with that that I think will determine the future for this scenario. You know, in my own country, in Australia, in the 1970s, from 1976 to about 1983, we had roughly, in a relatively small population, we had roughly 100,000 people come from Indochina as refugees. And at the time, there were some who said that this was a disaster, that they were going to overwhelm the country, that this would be economically unsupportable, that they would not be able to fit in to the Australian community and so on. No one says that now about the Vietnamese, particularly the Indo-Chinese communities at the time. But it was exploited a bit at the time. The difference is that the major parties at the time did not exploit it. And so it was accepted. And now they're a part of Australian society, and people eat Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian food very, very happily, and, intermarry and so on. All of those things happen. The truth is that the movement of people around the world is not a genie that can be put back in the box. We can't now say, the British can't say, we won't have any Poles here anymore. It's too late for that. The Australians can't say we won't have any Asians, as this country did until, with a formal policy, a White Australia policy, until 1966. That's too late. You can't go back to that. And actually, most of us don't want to go back to that anyway. So it's now a question of whether those who do come will be persecuted and the political damage that will be done in the interim. I noticed what Sharif said about Europe and the refugee flows into Europe, and I think that was very interesting because, from 2015 to about 2016, there were over 1 million people who went into Europe, mostly from Turkey, mostly Syrian, but not entirely Syrian refugees. So 1 million people is a large number of people to move in one move. Yeah, but the population of what was then EU 28 was about 500 million. So in a per capita sense, that's a 0.2% increase in population. You know, every year in Australia, just in terms of immigration, not refugees, but just in terms of immigration, we take 0.7%. So we take, you know, over three and a half times the proportion of people who flowed into Europe in that year. And Europe needs them. Europe needs them because the reality is the demographics of an aging population, in some countries more than others, are disastrous for Europe unless they get younger people into those communities. They will be unsupportable economically. Italy, in particular, it's in a disastrous position in the long term unless it gets millions of new people every year. Now, those people aren't going to come from the United States or Australia. They're not going to come from elsewhere in Europe. They're going to come from the Middle East and Asia and Africa. And if that's not the case, then they will be in a parlous situation into the future. So it's partly politics, which is actually operating in opposition to both economics and demography. The politics of anti-immigration, the politics of anti-refugees is actually in the long term harming those countries that where it's taken up. So I think I'm hopeful that in that long term, that those economic and demographic realities will start to come home to people and that they will start to force a more tolerant attitude towards refugees. At the moment, it's difficult to see, I have to be honest. And, you know, my pessimistic side says that right-wing populist nationalist politicians will exploit racism, and frankly, that's largely what it is. Frankly, it's largely racism in order to gain political advantage against these people. But we can do something about that.
Even in Australia, during the COVID-19, there was sort of some incidents in Canberra and some other places, anti-Chinese campaign or whatever.
Yeah.
This sort of things happening, and that will happen if things goes like this. What I think, like we at the moment we have a refugee issue all over the world. Millions refugee. The international body has to provide them food. It is not enough, but they are trying to. But when there will be a situation, so what we are going to do, how will the activists how we are going to handle this situation? There will be a chaos. It is just started. The recession has started in Australia, but it has not started. The real face of the recession is not yet. We have heard about, maybe John has faced it in Australia when there was a recession. There are small recessions here, but in a big, it happens in the after the Second World War. So so we cannot even understand what will be the face of recession, economic crisis. We know about our country, Bangladesh, India. There was a recession, and a lot of people died. There was a riot in Calcutta. Millions of people died, and there was riots in different cities after the crisis. After the war, there was economic crisis. Even then, still it is happening, but that happens during the economic crisis. So this is a huge task. It's coming to us, to John and others, his comrades who are associated with him. I know Mr. John is also working for the Myanmar refugees. Here, I have met them people in NU in a conference in AGM. There are a lot of people are getting support from the Refugee Action Committee, and they are very lucky that they are getting sort of moral support from the Refugee Action Committee in Australia. So, so these sort of things that's worried. I mean, people think, but how far they will think. They're already stressed. They having watching war, watching COVID-19. They're already stressed. So I mean, but people like John or Sharif Saber or layman activists like Kamrul Khan, we'll have a task. But how I'm really worried how we will handle. But we have to handle. We have to handle. Sharif Saber, what do you say?
Look, this is, I think John has very nicely responded to your question that what can we do or what should we do, what the world can do, what countries can do. Now, one thing is true that our kind of capacity is very limited. There is no doubt about that. But at the same time, we also need to know that we can do something. What can we do? I think the first thing that we can try to do is to create more awareness among people. So we are organizing. You have organizing this talk show. We are talking about it, uh, and what I believe that the media and the people, those who actually run the right wing media, these are actually doing the most of the damage to our countries as well as the fraternity, the relationship among people, and the harmony. That is very important. We need to maintain that, especially in a crisis period like this, in a pandemic situation like this. It is so important that the government should be very careful in their statements. People like Mr. Trump, people like Mr. Scott Morrison, people like Mr. Modi, people like Mr. Xi Jinping. These are the people whom people around the world, they think that they are very important people. They are actually important people. And these important people should not actually give any message to the people at large, which is not helpful, which could actually incite violence, which could incite a lot of problems. You can see the example of the United States, what happened recently, which is very unfortunate. And I think that is where it is very. John has clearly mentioned that it is mostly the political issue. It is refugee crisis is a symptom of politics. It is. We must actually accept that, unfortunately. Now, I better actually sidetrack a bit because we thought that we should actually talk about refugees and COVID-19 as well. So, what is happening now then? John has mentioned one very important thing that people are needed by Western countries. People are needed by countries like Japan. People are needed by countries like Germany, Italy, and even Australia. So we are talking about working visa now. Again, we are talking about it. Even during this COVID-19 period, we are talking about working visa. We want people coming in to actually do some work. And as you know, that Australia at the moment, the strength of Australia is now in agriculture. It is resurfacing. And if we want to actually do that to provide food to the rest of the world, because which is in the entire world is in kind of a crisis because of this COVID-19, then we need people to go to the farm and actually harvest and engage in agricultural activities. So that is one part of the story. But again, when we look at the overall refugees, uh, does it really help? Because when, say, for example, if America opens up that, okay, migrants are welcome, then they have categories. In those categories, how many are actually from the refugee category? Australia, when they actually invite people, how many of them are from the refugee category? That is not much. So we are talking about 26 million refugees, but we are saying that International Organization of Migration, they are saying that, okay, this target of 2020 is only 70,000. And they're also saying that, well, and they put a suspension of the refugee settlement related travel since March 2020. That is International Organization of Migration. So that means what is happening? The result is we are not seeing a lot of people actually being allowed to resettle in a third country. So which is really painful. Now, given the scenario, I think the conditions of the refugees around the world at the moment, since they are not going to be resettled sooner, then how to protect them, how to protect their interest, how to actually, keep them healthy at the same time. So that is the main thing, and especially during this COVID time, is very important. I think there are three issues here are important at the moment to think about. First, the provision of food and food shelter. That is whether, and you will see that some of the places in even in Greece, in some of the islands, the tents, the accommodation is so bad that it is impossible to live in that kind of ghettos. Right, I'm talking about Greece. Of course, Bangladesh, more than 1 million people are there and refugees. They are in a serious trouble in terms of shelter because the rainy season is now in Bangladesh, and this is the flood season as well. And recently, what the Bangladesh government has done, they sent 300 or a number of people, actually more than 300 could be. That was in the news, but there could be more than that. So they were actually sent to an island called Vashanchar, and because they were infected with COVID-19, and then they mentioned initially that they would be settled back to the mainland, but now the government is saying no, that then they will be permanently settled there. So these kind of things are happening around the world with refugees and during this COVID-19 period. Now, the medical treatment is a serious issue now. Their testing, their isolation in a very, overcrowded areas where houses are very close to each other, their accommodation is not properly prepared for them, and sometimes they are not even habitable. So these are the issues we need to look at the moment, and of course the overall economic situation, their income support is a problem because many of them used to work before COVID-19. Now, because of COVID-19, they have lost those works. So they are now in a very dire situation. So the world should actually, the governments around the world and individuals, those who have money, they should actually think it carefully to help these people in need. They are in trouble. I think we are talking about 1% of the population of the entire world. They are in trouble. And we, those who are fortunate enough to have something, we all should actually come forward and try to help and try to convince the stakeholders, try to convince the global organizations that be a little bit more proactive, do something more for these unfortunate people. Thank you.
This is the time to address this issue. We have a lot of issues that has to be addressed, but particularly during the COVID-19, we have different issue. People has to take the challenges. We don't have the experience, particularly our generation. We don't have the experience how to face the challenge of this situation. Everyday television, that is the headline. How we will face COVID-19, isolation, distance maintaining, and all this. But we are not thinking in those issues which has to be addressed by the economists, by the refugee leaders who are doing research, doing some actions. That has to be. That is the reason we have gathered. We bring John. John is a very talented person, and he lead our. I have listened to his speeches with a lot of information which I do not even know about those things, and it is important to come forward like John, the other countries like India, Bangladesh. We have some people working for IOM. I know a lady. He is ambassador to United Nations, possibly. He was ambassador in France. I will talk to them. I will bring them to the people. So how they are addressing it, it has to be addressed, and we have to prepare ourselves to mobilize people to make aware. Not only awareness in action. So that has to be done. I'm sure that John is looking after those issues, how to address those situations, particularly in Australia, and possibly he will also make a statement. So what has to be done? I know Richard Dennis is coming to a discussion program to face the economic challenges and all this, and same as John will come with some programs and issue to be addressed by the common people and the economists and politicians. So what's the plan, John, you are having, what you are thinking? So we are looking forward actually. In fact, I was every day I was looking what are the statement by Refugee Action Committee, what we can do. Thank you, John. Please.
Well, I think. Thanks, Kamrul. There's a lot of praise there that I'm not sure I deserve, but I think a number of points are really important. One is that not to oppose the policies is actually much more dangerous, much more expensive, much more difficult than to let them occur. In the Australian case, we know that Australia has spent, since 2012, more than $5 billion locking up a handful of people in Papua New Guinea, in Nauru, and in some cases in Australia. $5 billion. And the case can be made to Australians that these people, they've committed no crime, they can be admitted to the Australian community, and you would be better off because that $5 billion could be spent on an increase in your pension, or could be spent in an increase in education or in health spending. That's one simple case that can be made. But the other case that can be made is that our politics are fundamentally distorted by this, that we have elections being won and lost on the question of whether or not a handful of people can be admitted or kept out of the country, when there are much more important questions for the lives of ordinary people in this country. And the same is the case everywhere around the world. When Trump talks about the Mexicans or the Central Americans coming into America, it's a distraction. It's a distraction from a question like, why don't so many Americans have decent health care? Or why is college tuition so expensive to get your kids to college? Those are the questions that this is a distraction from. So I think it's possible to make that argument. It's possible to win people over on that basis. And also, when you come down to it, the bulk of people, even in this country, in Australia, which has got pretty horrendous policies about refugees, even in this country, when you ask people, you poll them, and I'm a political scientist, political economist, you poll them about these questions, they say now by a considerable majority, let them out of detention, let them out. They say let them out and let them stay. The vast majority of people, They maybe don't vote in elections on that question. They vote on other questions. But when you ask them that question, they're pretty good about it. So for me, there's a fundamental rule of building a social movement that was, I think, known in the 19th century in the anti-slavery movement, that was known in the 20th century in the independence movements in so many developing countries, that was known in the Aboriginal rights movement, in the feminist movement, and in any other progressive movement that you can name. And that is, and it's the abiding rule, don't give up.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, are you throwing any programs or any charter of demand or some action program on refugee situation? What is prevailing at the moment
Oh,
worldwide?
yeah, we have a whole program. I mean, I'm not sure if you can put up our website here, but there's an obvious alternative, and the obvious alternative is not rocket science, because it's what this country used to do before, and the sky did not fall in. But all of that's on our website. I'm not sure, Kamrul, if it's possible to put up, but if you look up a Refugee Action Campaign, Canberra, you'll find all of those suggestions about what should be done, what we think the government should do, the policy that we should follow.
That has to be actually, we have to bring it campaign because people, even people who migrated, do not give importance, because some even the refugee ultimately they forget their hardship they had in the initial stage. So people has to get involved, and I am very
Yeah.
happy the people in Australia, the older people, senior people, retired people, they are coming forward to support this movement, which is very enthusiastic. I would like to tell my friends all over the world, particularly in my country, Bangladesh, the country of 160 million people. Look, there are people in Australia that they support, they welcome refugee, they protect refugee, they fight for the refugee, they fight for the against the racism. There are people in Australia, those who are struggling, they are fighting. So this is very important. I think we have to get more strength, and we need to appear. We have to motivate people to bring into the movement. So our today's commitment to the listeners all over the world, and we will try to discuss. Having a look on the website, we will pick up few issues and we can discuss issues. And we will try next time. We will try to bring some people who are working with the refugee in Bangladesh. There's a lot of people. We had already an interview with a person who is working for refugee in Bangladesh, in Chittagong, in Rangamati, in Cox's Bazar. So we'll try to bring them, and summing all these things, we can bring it to the John or other people who are working internationally with the refugee issue. But it has to be addressed properly with the people, mobilizing people. Otherwise, we cannot achieve. Only our a few voice, John's voice, my voice, or Samir's voice will not work. People has to come, and people has to understand they have some responsibility to protect the refugee, and we have to think so we can stop like war. We should go against war. I mean, I'm sure the Refugee Action Committee also speak out against war, and I am also very concerned that we should also raise voice against war. And there was a lot of rallies in front of the Australian Parliament during the Iraq War. But who listened to they don't listen. But anyway, something we have to find out how we can make them listen. The people's message that we don't want war. We want more money for the welfare, not for war. That message has to go to the politicians and activists that we want this. We do not want war. We do not want warfare. We want welfare. So that has this sort of movement will particularly stop war. The attention. Like people are also think. I sometimes think when the Korea, South Korea, North Korea, they're threatening, though they can attack anybody. The bombs and all these. We know what happened to Hiroshima. We know, but still there is a threat of war of paramagnetic, the atomic war. So that is very dangerous. So we have to raise this issue and also start a fight and make people motivated. The war is not the solution. Power of arms is not the solution. America is building arms. Russia also building arms to compete. So this is not the solution. This will bring a tragic to the humanity, the mankind. So we have to address all these issues. Thank you, John, for you mentioning the issue. And I would like to tell Attabur to conclude. Before that, I will tell Sharif Saber to please sum of your what you have said, and then I will come to John. He will sum up, and then we'll end up this program with a new planning for another program. Thank you, Sharif Saber. Would you please say something in conclusion, please?
Oh, look, I think we have said enough in our forum today. Just one thing I would like to conclude with that I would call it criminal if no action is taken. I think we as conscious citizens, if we don't actually come forward and do something, that means we are failing ourselves. That is one part of my conscience that I believe in. And at the same time, I think the governments should be not only proactive, they should be passionate, they should be clear about what they are doing, and they should not just try to score political goals and do something against the willingness or the kind of wish of the people. That should not be right. So in this COVID-19 situation, government should take more action, should be more proactive, should be more compassionate. In Australia, there is now, I think John knows it clearly, that there is a call now to release people from the detention center because it is quite dangerous for them. In the US, in the detention center and jails, in some jails, in some detention center, the COVID infection rate is more than 70%. So we are also fearful. We think that there should be the good sense prevailing among governments around the world to do justice, to behave more compassionately with the refugees. Thank you.
Look, thank you, Sharif. I have very little to add to everything that's been said, but perhaps just two very brief things. One is, I think, crises expose weaknesses in institutions, in societies, and in systems. If you have a business that seems to be doing very well in the good times, but it's got a bad business model, that will be exposed in a crisis. And the same thing happens, I think, with political institutions and political systems. And this crisis has exposed that, in so many ways, that we have the United States, the most developed country, the largest country, the wealthiest country on earth in total. This is a country which has the highest number of infections, the largest deaths, a thousand, more than 1,000 times more deaths than Australia. And yet, it's not 1,000 times more the population. So you see that, and you see that in terms of the way in which refugees and immigration has been handled as well. Poorer countries, with structural weaknesses in terms of the ability for health services to operate, for housing situations to be more separated, and so on, are going to be worse hit as a result. And refugees in detention, for the same reason, are going to be harder hit. And certainly we've been campaigning for that reason for them to be released. But the other, and I think maybe to end perhaps, hopefully, on an optimistic note, one of the things that this crisis has done, and that we've been trying to do for a long time on the refugee issue, is to say, well, it's true that even though a majority of Australians think these people should be let out of detention, even though that's the case, and the Parliament has not paid any attention to that, what we are doing is constructing a different form of politics. Because all the research shows that the population does not trust institutional politics. They don't trust politicians. They view them in a very poor light. Now, what we're doing, and sometimes some of my relatives sometimes say to me, "Why don't you go into politics, John?" I say, I am in politics. This is politics. What we're doing is politics, but it's politics of a different kind. And that's what we've got to try to build, a politics of the people with real humanitarian social goals that people want, that people can look to the future to with confidence. And that doesn't rely on what happens in a parliamentary building. Thanks, Sharif, and thanks, Kamrul, for your facilitating.
Thank you.
It's been a
good conclusion.
great
Made. Good conclusion. We have more plans. We'll let you know, because our goal is to get people involved in Australia. People has to make a decision when they vote, when they act. That people has to make who speak for the refugee, who speak for the environment. People has to make a decision in every election in ACT or whatever, in Bangladesh, whatever. So these are very important issues. So I want to conclude, and I want to request Attabur, since having a little problem, health issues, but he has come up. Hope he will get better soon. I will request Attabur, the CEO of this 360 event, to conclude this program.
Thank you, Kamrul Ahsan bhai. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening about today the COVID-19 or the pandemic situation around the refugee and how this is going to be. So we had our guest today, John, who is an activist about the refugee. At the same time, he is the faculty of Australian National University. We had the guest today from Royal Melbourne Institute, the academic activist, Professor Sharif As Saber, and we had our moderator and, as usual, our speaker and guest from Canberra, Mr. Kamrul Ahsan Khan, who is also in environmental and cultural activities. Ladies and gentlemen, whoever listened this session, hopefully you'll get more better and more defined information about the refugee problem, what we may face during this pandemic situation. And if you'd like to get more information, there is the website you can see on the screen. You may like to visit the web address. I'm showing it on the web right now, which is www.refugeeaction.org. The main the banner you can see, it says Refugee Action Campaign. So you can get more detail in there. So once again, thank you very much being with us today. And keep an eye. We have another program coming up on this Thursday. This is about specialized health, about men's and women's health. And we have specialists. They will be joining and will be delivering few critical information about our health. And also there will be general discussion about current COVID-19 situation. Thanks very much for staying with us. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank